Michael and Hannah were a couple who were always looking for adventure. They loved to get out of the city, to explore uncharted corners of nature. When they heard about a nearby forest, famous for its ancient trees and mysterious atmosphere, it became the perfect idea for a day out. The forest in question was called Black Grove by the locals. Hannah heard from an old lady at the store that the forest was guarded by an ancient spirit, and it was better not to go there, especially after sunset. "That's just a local story," Michael chuckled when Hannah told him about the warning. "We'll have a picnic, enjoy nature, and no spirit will bother us." In the morning, they packed a basket of food, a blanket, a camera, and set off. As they approached the forest, they were struck by its grandeur. Tall black trees rose to the sky, their branches intertwined to form a dense canopy through which light barely penetrated. Their footsteps echoed in the dense silence as they walked along the forest path. The sounds of nature, birds singing, rustling leaves, gradually faded, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Hannah began to feel a little uneasy. "It's a bit too quiet here," she remarked, but Michael only shrugged. They chose a clearing in the center of the forest, spread out a blanket and laid out food, but the longer they were there, the more they felt as if someone was watching them. At first, Michael and Hannah didn't think much of the strangeness. As they packed up their basket and decided to walk deeper into the forest, Michael noticed that the trees looked different. "It's just because we went further," he said, but even his voice was unsure. Hannah turned to look at the clearing they had just been in, but it was gone. The trees were closing in tightly, and the path they had come from was gone. We definitely came from here, right?" she asked, trying to fight off the growing sense of panic. Michael squinted, peering into the thick shadows between the trees. "Maybe we just went the wrong way," he muttered, leading her on. But the forest seemed to be playing with them. Every time they tried to go in one direction, the scenery changed. Trees they had sworn they'd passed by appeared again. Their branches reached down like misshapen arms. In places, roots emerged from the ground like entwined snakes, ready to grab their legs. "Michael, something's wrong here," Hannah's voice trembled. She looked around and suddenly realized that their footprints, which should have been left in the soft earth, were gone. Now they wandered in silence, plunging deeper into this strange world. The trees began to seem alive. Their bark resembled faces, and some of them looked at them with creepy grimaces. "This is not just a forest," Hannah finally said, her breathing quickening. "We're trapped." They tried to quicken their pace, but no matter how far they walked, they always returned to the same place. A black, gloomy oak towered in the center, its branches bending as if ready to embrace them. "We were just here," Michael breathed, clenching his fists. Suddenly, Hannah heard a whisper. It was quiet as the wind at first, but it grew louder with each passing second. Words she couldn't understand, coming from deep within the forest. "Who's there?" she called out, but there was only silence in response. Michael turned to answer, but froze. Behind Hannah, a shadow passed through the trees. A tall, curved figure, seemingly made of branches and darkness, slid away, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Michael and Hannah continued to wander, but the forest seemed to be closing in on them. Every turn, every step in what seemed like the right direction brought them back to the same place. The black oak tree became the center of their nightmare, its massive trunk watching their every move. The whispers grew louder, turning into a chorus of voices, drowning out their own thoughts. It seemed as if the very air was filled with the sound, creeping into their consciousness. "We're not getting out," Hannah whispered, her hands shaking. "Don't say that," Michael said, but there was fear in his eyes. He grabbed her hand and pulled her along with him. But their steps were slowing, as if the ground beneath their feet was becoming viscous, holding them back. Suddenly, they heard the snapping of branches. The shadow they had seen before was now more distinct. A tall, twisted figure, like a cross between man and tree, stepped out of the fog. Her body was covered in bark, and long branches grew from her head. Her face was a black void, but the feeling of a gaze piercing their bones made them both freeze. The creature extended a long arm of gnarled branches, as if inviting them. "It's not a spirit," Hannah whispered, her voice breaking with fear. "It's the forest itself." Michael tried to take a step back, but his legs would no longer obey him. Roots had emerged from the ground, wrapping themselves around their ankles like living shackles. The forest was breathing, emitting a low hum like a heavy heartbeat. "We are part of this," Michael said, realizing the truth. Hannah screamed, but the sound of her voice was lost in the silence. The branches began to slowly descend, wrapping around them until the forest completely swallowed their figures. In the morning, the forest looked as quiet and serene as ever. The black oak tree stood still, but now 2 new patterns could be discerned in its bark. The outlines of Michael and Hannah's faces. The villagers noticed that the forest had become even quieter, but no one dared to enter it. After all, everyone knew that those who entered the Black Grove never returned. Now Michael and Hannah became part of the ancient spirit, continuing its work, luring new travelers so that the forest would never be alone.